The crisp autumn air swirled with fallen leaves as Buster the squirrel scampered across the forest floor. His bushy tail flicked with nervous energy, his tiny claws drumming a frantic rhythm on the rough bark of an ancient oak. Today was the day. The annual harvest festival, a time for all the forest creatures to gather their bounty in preparation for the long, harsh winter. Buster wasn't like the other squirrels. While his friends chattered excitedly, stuffing their cheeks with as many acorns as they could hold, Buster meticulously selected only the plumpest, roundest nuts. He didn't waste time on any that looked even slightly bruised or damaged. His bushy brows furrowed in concentration as he stockpiled his treasures, muttering to himself, 1 for the coldest days, 2 for when the snow gets deep. Across the clearing, Barnaby the bear lumbered along, his belly brushing against the ferns. A carefree grin stretched across his muzzle. Unlike Buster, Barnaby had no interest in saving for the future. He reveled in the abundance of the season, stuffing himself with berries, nuts, and even the occasional plump beetle. "Hey, Buster!" Barnaby boomed, his voice echoing through the trees. "Why the long face? There's enough food here for a dozen bears like me." Buster paused, his cheek pouches bulging with acorns. "Don't you worry about winter, Barnaby. What will you eat when the snow falls and the forest is bare?" Barnaby chuckled, a deep rumble that shook the leaves from the surrounding trees. "Winter? Don't be silly, little friend. There'll always be something to eat. Besides, worrying won't fill your belly, now will it?" Buster shook his head, a worried frown etched on his tiny face. He knew better than to argue with Barnaby. The bear was much bigger and much stronger, but a nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. What if Barnaby was wrong? What if winter came sooner or harsher than anyone expected? With a final sigh, Buster scurried up the oak tree, his precious acorns tucked safely away in a hidden hollow. He glanced down at Barnaby, who was already fast asleep under a shady maple, his belly full and content. Buster couldn't help but wonder, would Barnaby regret his carefree ways when the first blizzard swept through the forest? Only time would tell. The weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. Squirrels chattered busily, burying their treasures and lining their cozy drays with soft leaves. Birds flocked south, their farewell calls echoing through the crisp autumn air. Even the playful chipmunks slowed their pace, gathering nuts and seeds with newfound purpose. Barnaby, however, remained blissfully unconcerned. He spent his days lounging in the sun, napping under the trees, and gorging himself on the remaining autumn bounty. The forest floor was littered with the remnants of his feasts, discarded berry cores, gnawed cobs of corn, and the shells of countless nuts. One crisp morning, a light dusting of snow painted the forest floor white. Barnaby lumbered out of his den, his breath puffing out in white clouds. He stretched languidly, his belly rumbling with hunger. He shuffled towards his favorite berry patch, only to find it bare. The once lush bushes were now just skeletal branches, stripped bare by the first frost. Disappointment gnawed at Barnaby. He lumbered on, his stomach growling louder with every step. He tried his usual foraging spots, the nut tree by the stream, the hidden patch of mushrooms under the old oak, but each place was empty. The other animals had been far more diligent than him, and the forest pantry was now bare. Barnaby trudged back to his den, his head hung low. He curled up in a ball, shivering despite the thick layer of fur covering his body. His carefree attitude suddenly felt foolish. He whimpered, his stomach growling in protest. "If only I hadn't been so wasteful," he mumbled, regret gnawing at him like a persistent ache. He closed his eyes, picturing Buster's meticulously chosen acorns, safe and sound in their hidden hollow. Would his friend share his bounty, or would Barnaby have to face the harsh winter alone and hungry? A biting wind howled through the forest, sending shivers down Barnaby's thick fur. Curled up in his den, his stomach ached with emptiness. He'd tried venturing out again that morning, but the snow had deepened, making it difficult to move. Hunger gnawed at him, and despair threatened to engulf him. Suddenly, a muffled thump echoed from outside his den. Barnaby perked up his ears, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. He lumbered to the entrance and cautiously peeked out. There, nestled in the snow, lay a single, perfect acorn. Barnaby recognized it instantly. It was one of Buster's prized possessions, plump and round with the promise of a hearty meal. His heart pounded with conflicting emotions, relief at the prospect of food, and shame at his own carelessness. "Buster," he called out tentatively. His voice emerged hoarse and weak. There was no answer, only the relentless howl of the wind. Barnaby eyed the acorn, his mouth watering. It wouldn't be enough to sustain him for long, but it was a start. He carefully scooped it up, a new determination hardening his gaze. He wouldn't wallow in self-pity any longer. He had to find Buster and apologize for his boastful ways. Maybe, just maybe, his friend would be willing to share some of his carefully hoarded stash. With newfound purpose, Barnaby pushed himself out of his den. The snow was deeper than he expected, but the promise of food and forgiveness fueled his steps. He followed the faint trail of paw prints leading away from the acorn, a silent plea forming in his mind. "Buster, wait. I need to talk to you," he bellowed, his voice hoarse but hopeful. Would Buster even listen? Or would the winter have hardened the little squirrel's heart as well? Barnaby pressed on, determined to find out. The snow fell in thick, swirling blankets, blurring the familiar landmarks of the forest. Barnaby lumbered through the drifts, his breath coming out in white puffs. He followed the faint trail of squirrel tracks, a trail that seemed to disappear and reappear like a teasing whisper. His belly rumbled incessantly, a constant reminder of his foolishness. Days turned into a blur of weary trudging. Doubt gnawed at Barnaby's resolve. Maybe Buster had found a different den, far away from Barnaby's reach. Maybe the squirrel wouldn't be willing to help, his trust shattered by Barnaby's earlier behavior. Just when Barnaby was about to give up, the familiar silhouette of a tall oak tree emerged from the swirling snow. It was the same oak where Buster had stored his acorns. Hope surged through Barnaby once again. He quickened his pace, his large paws sinking deep into the unforgiving snow. Reaching the base of the tree, Barnaby saw no sign of Buster. Disappointment washed over him, a cold, heavy feeling worse than the winter chill. He slumped down against the rough bark, his head hanging low. Suddenly, a tiny voice echoed from above. "Barnaby? Is that really you?" Barnaby looked up, squinting through the falling snow. Perched on a branch high above him, his bushy tail twitching nervously, was Buster. Relief flooded Barnaby, warm and comforting. "Buster," Barnaby boomed, his voice hoarse. "I'm so glad I found you." He trailed off, shame welling up within him. Buster scampered down the trunk, his movements surprisingly quick despite the snow. He reached a hollow near the base of the tree and nudged it open with his nose. A warm, nutty aroma wafted out, making Barnaby's stomach growl even louder. "Come on in," Buster chirped, gesturing with his tiny paw. "It's not much, but it should keep the hunger pangs at bay for a while." Barnaby hesitated, overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. "But your precious acorns," he stammered. Buster smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Turns out, a squirrel doesn't need quite as many acorns as I thought. Besides, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Wouldn't you agree?" Barnaby shuffled into the cozy hollow, the warmth enveloping him like a comforting blanket. The scent of roasted acorns filled the air, making his mouth water. Buster scurried around, setting down a small pile of plump, golden brown nuts. They looked even more delicious than they had in the fall. "Thank you, Buster," Barnaby mumbled, his voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Buster perched on a nearby twig, his bushy tail twitching with nervous energy. "There's just one small problem," he squeaked hesitantly. Barnaby's heart skipped a beat. "A problem? What do you mean?" Buster fidgeted, avoiding Barnaby's gaze. "Well, you see, I wasn't exactly the most careful squirrel when I gathered my acorns. I may have hidden a few too many in different places." Barnaby's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "The thing is," Buster continued, his voice barely a whisper, "with all this snow, I can't remember where most of them are hidden." Barnaby stared at him, a mixture of disbelief and frustration washing over him. He had finally found Buster, only to discover that most of the precious winter provisions were lost. Now, not only was he dependent on Buster's limited stash, but he also felt a pang of responsibility for the squirrel's forgetfulness. "Don't worry, Barnaby," Buster chirped, trying to sound optimistic. "We'll figure something out. We can share what you have left, and maybe, just maybe, I'll manage to find a few more hidden treasures." But a shadow of doubt lingered in both their eyes. The winter was far from over, and the remaining food supply seemed worryingly small. Would their combined resources be enough to see them through the harsh months ahead? And would their newfound friendship be strong enough to weather the challenges that lay before them? Weeks turned into months, and the grip of winter tightened on the forest. The snowdrifts deepened, burying the familiar landmarks under a thick, white blanket. The once plentiful food sources were almost depleted, leaving Barnaby and Buster with only a handful of precious acorns. The initial awkwardness between them had faded, replaced by a sense of camaraderie forged in shared hardship. Buster, ever the optimist, kept searching for his forgotten stashes, venturing out into the snow each day with renewed determination. Barnaby, in turn, used his immense strength to clear paths through the drifts, allowing them to reach hidden patches of berries and bark that still held some nourishment. One particularly harsh day, a blizzard raged outside, battering the oak tree with a relentless fury. Huddled together in the hollow, Barnaby and Buster shared their last 2 acorns, a single bite each. Their stomachs rumbled in protest, but a sense of companionship warmed them from within. "I never thought I'd say this," Barnaby rumbled, his voice surprisingly gentle, "but I'm glad you were so forgetful about your acorns, Buster." Buster chuckled, a soft sound barely audible over the howling wind. "Me neither, Barnaby. Me neither." Suddenly, a loud thump echoed through the hollow. A small, round object rolled into their midst, gleaming golden in the dim light. It was an acorn, perfectly plump and untouched by the harsh winter. Barnaby and Buster stared at it, then at each other. A wide grin spread across Buster's face. "Looks like I found one more after all," he exclaimed. They shared that acorn, the last bite tasting sweeter than any feast they had ever known. It wasn't just food, it was a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength they found in their newfound friendship. As the blizzard subsided and the sun peeked through the clouds, a new sense of determination settled upon them. They had faced hunger and hardship, but their bond had grown stronger. They knew that together they could continue searching for food, and with the coming of spring, they would work side by side, gathering and storing provisions, ensuring they were both prepared for the next winter. The experience had changed them both. Barnaby learned the importance of sharing, while Buster understood the value of planning ahead. Most importantly, they discovered that true friendship could bloom even in the harshest of winters.